Today we're speaking with Dr. Charles Perou, Professor of Genetics and Pathology and Laboratory Medicine and a member of the Lineberger Comprehensive Cancer Center at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Dr. Perou presented the AACR Distinguished Lecturer on the Science of Cancer Health Disparities in Racial Ethnic Minorities and the Medically Underserved, funded by Susan G. Komen for the Cure. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Perou.
My pleasure.
Your lab found that premenopausal African American women are diagnosed with the basal-like triple-negative breast cancer subtype about twice as often as Caucasian women. What kinds of insights does this give with regards to disparities in breast cancer mortality?
Well, I think it helps to explain some of the disparities that are seen. For example, this basal-like subtype is an aggressive breast cancer subtype. And just by having more or a higher frequency of a more aggressive subtype will cause that group to have a worse overall survival. And that's precisely what we've seen. And so we think that explains some of the racial outcome disparity differences, but certainly not all of it. And in some newer work that I'll present today, what we saw was that what we thought was the good outcome group, the luminal A subtype, looks to have a worse outcome in African Americans versus Caucasians. So what we thought was a good outcome group of tumors might actually not be such a good outcome group, and that too might help explain some of these outcome differences. So why the luminal A's in African Americans might have a worse outcome than in Caucasians, we don't know. But clearly, now that we know this feature, we will look into it.
Would you describe for us your ongoing work to characterize the diversity of breast cancer tumors?
So my lab has, for many years now, been using a genomics approach and a genetics approach to study breast cancer. And one of the take-home messages is that breast cancer is not one disease, but it's at least 5 different diseases, and it's possibly even more than 5. And so as we get larger and larger sample sets, we're able to better identify these less frequent disease subtypes. And as we see these disease subtypes, they each have unique biologic features that may or may not contribute to, for example, the racial outcome disparity differences. And so we need very large sample sets to be able to ask the questions about the smaller subsets. And as your question alluded to, right, we're finding more and more diversity and heterogeneity within breast cancer the more we study it. So, the more we know, the more complex it gets. But we can begin to see that some of that complexity, like this basal-like subtype or what other people call triple negatives, or this luminal A subtype, can have differences in their behavior that could explain some of these racial outcome disparity differences.
Your research crosses the disciplines of genomics, biology, bioinformatics, epidemiology, and the clinical treatment of breast cancer. So from your perspective, what are the biggest challenges with regard to cancer health disparities? Well,
one of the challenges is to thoroughly study this topic. You have to be a part of all those disciplines. And I know a couple of them and depend on many of my close colleagues to guide me and to interact on others. So I have very close collaborations with oncologists, including Lisa Carey at UNC and Fumio Lapati at the University of Chicago, very close collaborations with epidemiologists, Bob Milliken at UNC, and then we have a bioinformatics group and a statistics group. And so, at least from a scientific perspective, one of the challenges is just getting all the people together with the right knowledge to address this issue, taking this multidisciplinary approach, which is really what is needed to try and make some of these discoveries. And then once we have all the people in place, right, you need the right trials or the right patient cohorts to address these issues. And that's very challenging because it takes years and millions of dollars to collect the thousands of patients from the population-based studies with the type of life history information and treatment information that's really needed to make these insights. And so, on that level, it's quite a challenge and typically requires multi-institution collaborations as well to get these cohorts collected and studied.
When it comes to disparities, what do you see as some of the solutions on the horizon? Are there any?
Well, I think one of the big issues that we keep arriving at is access to health care and proper treatment, right? So some features, for example, if there are genetic causes to the racial disparity differences, we can't change that. But if it's due to differences in treatment, we can try and change that. And so I think access to health care, access to the right treatments is critically important and probably the most important interventional step we can make. Of course, that is, gets to the healthcare issue in our country in general, and the cost of many of these oncology drugs is very high. And so that's also a barrier to getting the proper treatments. But I think we absolutely have to address this barrier and make sure that everyone gets the drugs they need, that they adhere to the drugs. Some of these drugs require 5 years or more of continuous treatment. And so, some patients, including myself, right, when you have to take something for a long period of time, you kind of get lax towards the end. But it's critically important to stay adherent to these things. And I think that's probably the number one interventional way that we can make a difference.
Dr. Perou, thank you very much.
My pleasure, again. Thank you.